Welcome to Gregorian Chat.
Welcome to Gregorian Chat, episode 27.
Is that right?
Yeah.
27 episodes.
Today we are joined by a very special guest, the one and only Dr. Jane Silloway Smith.
And the little baby.
Yeah, and Charlie. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Welcome.
It's going to be really great to have someone who's actually professional. We've
Yeah.
just been kind of scraping our way through, I think. The episodes.
we're just making it up as we go along,
Pretty much.
and just keeping it real.
But the reason that we have Dr. Jane on the podcast today is because the title is
What is the title?
Euthanasia. Can we live without it?
I came up with it. I should remember that. Euthanasia. Can we live without it? That's what we're going to be talking about. But not that it's more important, but it is primary in what we do here. The tea.
This is true. What are we drinking today?
Well, today we're drinking Geisha Getaway.
Geisha Getaway.
Geisha Getaway. It's a green tea.
Oh, thank you.
Bring it in.
It's a green tea, and it's got coconut and pineapple in it
Which, in other words, it's pina colada.
with green tea.
Pina colada tea. Awesome.
Um,
So why don't you maybe start by just telling us a bit about yourself, Dr. Jane?
Sure. So I run a research unit called Every Life, and that is a public policy unit that helps support MPs and other people who are in policy, their advisors, ministries, things like that, around issues that their own research units within, say, the National or the Labour Party don't really have the time to get into. Issues of conscience, usually, that are left up to an individual MP's conscience. So, like, for instance, euthanasia has been the major one for the past year, really. So I do research and then bring that research to MPs in ways that they can understand and can relate to, bring them evidence, answer questions that they may have, and basically help them start to think through how they may vote on these issues or what they may think about them.
Wow. Awesome.
oh, sounds
That's
pretty
great.
I didn't even know that existed. That's very good that it does.
Yeah. No, as you say, it's very important right at this time because of the euthanasia bill. David Seymour's it's end of life bill, right?
End of life choices.
End of life choices, that's the one. Great. Well, it's awesome to have you on the podcast.
Yes.
I think we've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently because we have a lot of students, especially in Newman Hall, but just at university in general, who maybe don't understand the issue or a lot of the issues that are going on in this debate. So kind of like, for instance, the first question, I guess, is like, what is the difference between assisted suicide and euthanasia?
Right, so assisted suicide and euthanasia both have the same end, and that's the end of life of a patient.
Okay.
But in assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes the lethal medication that the patient then goes to the drugstore, fills the prescription, and then takes the pills on their own time, in their own way. So the doctor's not involved in the actual death itself. With euthanasia, the doctor is directly involved, and when euthanasia, the doctor injects the lethal drugs into the patient at a time of both the doctor and patient's choosing.
Yeah. So both aren't ideal. But I suppose the difference is it's kind of just distancing the doctor from the suicide. With assisted suicide, with euthanasia, it's completely very clinical. The doctor's doing it all with an injection, and whereas with assisted suicide, it's okay, here's what you need, see you later, kind of thing.
Yeah, with assisted suicide, it gives a little bit more control to the patient in that they pick the time, they take it when they choose to, and the doctor's not involved. So for some doctors, that's a relief. They feel like they can get some distance. They've made the prescription, but they're not actually having to watch the patient die or actively causing the patient's death and experiencing that. Whereas in euthanasia, the patient will just be lying there and the doctor will inject them.
So could you say assisted suicide potentially has less opportunity for abuse of the process?
It does and it doesn't. In some ways, because it's not a doctor, a nurse, or other medical practitioner actively ending your life in front of you, it does in that, you feel like you might have more autonomy in that you can take the pills. But one of the problems they see in a place like Oregon, where it's been legal since 1997, is that the patient will get the prescription and they'll have it in their home and can take it whenever they want. But the state doesn't know how the person takes it or when they take it. So since the doctor's not involved, you don't know if a relative slipped the patient the pills. A caretaker did it. If the person accidentally took it, it was in a cupboard and they picking something out in the middle of the night and they don't know the circumstances, so you're never entirely sure how the person died because no one was there to record it.
Okay, interesting. And it was interesting what you're saying before about how the doctors, find it quite grievous. It's like, because their whole job really is to, they've signed up to this whole thing because they want to save lives.
Yeah.
They want to minimize, this kind of people dying, essentially. So I'm sure it'd be really hard for a lot of health professionals who they're like, I don't really sign up for this. But if this becomes a law, then, it could be a whole new job description.
And that also kind of brings up the issue of like safeguards. Of like that you hear a lot of that in the press. Is like there's not enough safeguards you can put in place for these things. So I suppose that's kind of touching on those things of like, okay, the act's been done, you've been given the drug, but you don't know who's taking it, you don't know who's been given it, you don't know if it's used. And I think you've got the same thing with the doctors, like the doctor's judgment call. How, is this person mentally sound, and if they're not, and how do we tell they're mentally sound? And that's a whole
you've touched on just a whole mess of issues, and it all comes down to, as you say, safeguards. One thing that I always find fascinating about these types of laws is that everyone recognizes that they're dangerous.
Right.
You're not going to hear a single person from the most active proponent maybe, but active proponents to the most opposed person will acknowledge that this isn't something you want just anybody doing.
Sure.
Like someone who proposes a law will have limits to it. Terminally ill, adults, people with irreversible conditions, declining conditions, and things. They'll have a doctor's, a checklist of things the doctor has to do. Usually 2 doctors sign off. They recognize that not only is this not something that you want just anybody doing, you don't just want people saying, oh, my life is too tough, I want to end it. But also that to ensure that someone's making a choice that they really want and that it's a good choice for them, you're going to have lots of things like doctors signing off, like competency requirements, like making sure they're an adult. You don't want some 15-year-old, even if they're terminally ill, to decide if they want to end their lives because they just don't understand what treatments are available or what death will actually be like, or what an assisted suicide or euthanasia death would be. So you'll have these limits because everyone recognizes these laws are dangerous. They're tricky things to do and to do well.
Yeah, so, like you said, touching on a whole heap of issues that could come forward now, and a lot of arguments have already been made. Something that we really wanted to ask you in the first part of this interview, what was it exactly that made you take a side, essentially? Because I think when we listened to your News Talk ZB interview, you said for a while that you were kind of on the fence with the whole debate. And it's a good sign, I think, for us kind of thinking about it. It's like, it shows that you've at least considered both sides. So what was it that made you get off the fence, as it were?
Right. So I started researching euthanasia back in 2012 when Marion Street put in her bill. Thought I was a public policy researcher at a think tank called Maxim Institute at the time, and thought, this is going to be one of these issues that people are going to be talking about, and it's complex. And I had been doing social justice research and foreign aid and welfare in different areas, and looking at, how do you make laws that best protect people and enable them to lead lives that they want to lead, and that provide for opportunity and flourishing and all that other great stuff that we want for everyone in New Zealand. I thought this is an issue that touches on all those things, and so I need to look at that. So I started doing the research into it, reading both sides, reading widely, thinking, this is one of those issues where people have very strong opinions on both sides and need to understand it. And found the arguments for legalizing euthanasia were actually quite compelling. It's this idea that some people have terminal illnesses that they can linger on for weeks and weeks in a life that's not the life they would otherwise have chosen, and they're dying anyway. So if they really want to end it a little sooner, why stop them? And if they want to choose it, is that really affecting anybody else who wouldn't want that? And I know it was kind of ironic. At the time I was doing the research, my grandfather had pancreatic cancer, and we went to his basically what ended up being his deathbed about 2 weeks before he died, and sitting there and kind of having been reading all these things and watching and saying like, oh yeah, I can totally see that. Even if it might not be the choice he would want to make, I could see maybe other people in his situation to free, like my grandmother and my aunts taking care of him. Him, he couldn't eat. He loved to eat, and he couldn't eat anymore. All these things. I'm thinking, couldn't there be a way, an opening for those few people that would really just want to choose to end it just a little early to do that? Then I came back to the research and read some more, and started really digging into what was going on in the places where it's been legalized. It's actually pretty rare in public policy where you get places that have already introduced a law that you can see, like, so 10 years in the future, what does this look like? Because usually there's little things that are different. You know, school systems are different, welfare systems are different, populations are different, too many things. But with this law, you can actually see into the future. You can say, like, these countries have passed these laws. What does it look like? And the things that I found in the Netherlands and in Belgium and in Oregon and in Washington State, where the laws had been on the books for more than 10 years, was just terrifying. People being euthanized without their consent. In Belgium and the Netherlands, you're getting non-voluntary euthanasias where someone didn't ask to be euthanized. The doctors or nurses have decided this person's life is no longer worth living. We should end it now. You're getting instances of families coercing people to take it. You're getting people who say, you know, I'm a burden on my family. And so many sick people will feel like they're a burden on their caretakers. You don't have to do this for me. Why are you doing this? They already feel that. And then to give them the option of, well, you could end this sooner. You don't have to be this burden. How dangerous is that? And I know with my own grandfather's death, like I said, watching my aunts and my grandmother and stuff, and she would have been taking care of him for months and months, thinking, and I had even thought sitting there like, oh, why can't they just be released from this? And thinking, oh, what the amazing amount of pressure you as family have on a sick or dying person to make them choose something that they wouldn't necessarily want. Then you also get the cases where the euthanasia or assisted suicide doesn't go exactly as the person planned. You know, a lot of proponents will talk about it as this complete control over death, right? You finally conquered death. You get to decide how you die and when. This is awesome. This is pulling back the power from this horrible thing that we all have to go through. But it's not that way. Some cases of euthanasia deaths and assisted suicide deaths are quite ugly. Like the medication doesn't work. The drugs burn the person. The euthanasia drugs that they use are the same drugs they use in the death penalty. And you'll hear like
it's the same.
Amnesty International talk about how inhumane euthanasia basically is for prisoners as a way of killing them. Like, how are we not concerned that this is a way we're killing each other?
And I think the big argument that's often put forward is the slippery slope argument, of course. And so it's like, if we introduce it now, it's worth taking a look at those guinea pig countries, as you know, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, because I saw once you'd done your research, and then David Seymour had said, oh well, you've grossly kind of exaggerated. You know, there was at 600 and something percent.
Oh, the climb in euthanasia or in assisted suicide deaths in Oregon.
And so it's like, oh, well, you know, that's completely blowing it out of the water. It's if you take it in proportion, but the thing is, it's like, I was wondering, with the way that things are going, if it was legalized, how long would it be before we cross that threshold where it goes from euthanasia is unacceptable and it's a noble option to it's the noble option, right? So like, if you don't get assisted suicide or euthanasia, you're old, you're suffering, and your existence is difficult on yourself and your family. It seems like it won't be long before that argument comes through. Well, it's actually the moral thing to do, and then there's even more pressure coming from that side.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Asked me that question a year ago, and I would have said it would take about 5 to 8 years, because what we're seeing in places like Oregon, Netherlands, Belgium, the first countries in the U.S. state to legalize assisted suicide and/or euthanasia, that's how long it took. You had low numbers in Netherlands and Belgium. They were double digits, of course, big countries. Oregon, which is a state of about the same size as New Zealand, roughly 5 million people, you're seeing kind of 12, 36 kind of deaths a year. And that was pretty stable for the first several years. And then it just, after about 8 years of the law in all these places, it just kind of skyrockets. We're getting thousands of these deaths in the Netherlands and Belgium, and you're getting hundreds now in Oregon a year. So I would have said, last year you asked me this question, I would have said it takes about 5 to 8 years probably. But unfortunately, in the last year, we've seen Canada. Canada legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide last year. And already their numbers, you'd expect Canada, again, a little bit bigger than New Zealand, what, about 11 million people? I guess about twice the size of New Zealand, not quite. They're having 500, 600, 700 deaths reported, and this is without Quebec reporting in with their euthanasia law passed just this year. So we're seeing California, which just passed their law late last year. Again, the numbers are so high, so much higher than Oregon or Washington or Netherlands or Belgium in their first years relative to their populations, that there seems to be a definite shift now where I would think that if New Zealand were to pass a law, we wouldn't see the Oregon-style 12 deaths,
Yeah.
20 deaths. We might see 100, which is a lot more than I think people would expect. And we're seeing the cultural shifts that a lot of these places have a lot faster. So in Oregon, you'll hear doctors and professors at medical schools talk about how in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of their students and new doctors would talk about how controversial assisted suicide was. And it was a question they would ask themselves, you know, kind of around the lunch table. Would you do this?
Hypothetical.
Would you do this? What if you had a patient? Would you? Whereas today, and probably at least for the past 5, even maybe 10 years, it's not a question they ask themselves anymore. It's like, of course I would prescribe this. There's been a shift in how doctors see it. New doctors, training doctors. Probably one of the most chilling things I've read in my research is a book out of the Netherlands from 2015 by a journalist called Gerbert van Lernen, who had a partner who experienced a catastrophic brain injury as a result of surgery and became disabled. And he had been a big supporter of his country's euthanasia laws until about 5 years into his partner's disability, realizing that his friends were like, why don't you just euthanize him? Like, he doesn't need to be around anymore. You don't need this burden. And he thought, oh my goodness, we're a country of, we're liberal, we're open, we're accepting. Like, how did we turn from being, you know, open to people with disability and caring for them to suddenly being so cold? This is the way we talk about it socially. And he went back and did research and linked it to the passage of euthanasia laws in his own country, and just the shifts in society and culture that happen when people can say the suffering's too great, and when people come to not only say it's a reasonable option for a few people to take, but say actually maybe it's the preferred option.
That's right.
Because I suppose you're touching on there is sort of like, you know, it changes society. Like what you legislate against, you know, becomes your moral compass. So like if you know, like if you think like marijuana is illegal, therefore it's bad, you know, so like that's what your thinking is. And again, like we bring in euthanasia in, so like euthanasia is now acceptable because it's legal. And so I suppose that I mean that affects so many different things, like, you know, children's upbringings and even scientific developments, I suppose, because if something gets too difficult, just eradicate it rather than learn about it and improve upon it.
Yeah, that was another argument that came through.
Essentially,
introducing euthanasia as a more efficient option, a better option, could minimize like the actual our I guess the desire for medicine to be able to conquer these things and fight diseases and things. I mean, it's not as great an argument, but like it's definitely a consideration. And you know, sorry, what were you saying? So interesting. So when once you read all that research, that's when you made up your mind and thought, okay, well, this wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah, it all came down for me to basically thinking about what is public policy, what is law, and law is, first of all, a blunt tool. I know from working in welfare and in foreign aid legislation and policy that you can have the best of intentions, hope the most amazing things, pour the right amount of money in, and not get the outcomes you want because problems are complex. Welfare, how do you bring a family out of poverty with a law? You can't do it with a law. You need a good law, yes, but you also need great communities. You need strong support structures. You need the right things in place. You need the right amount of money. You need lots of different things to go right and well. So the law is a blunt tool. So anytime anyone proposes a law as the salvation, I'm a little skeptical because my experience in law has been that's not the case. Law has to be good, and there is better law and worse law, but there's no best law. There's no perfect law. Every law is a little bit imperfect. Every law has unintended consequences. And when you look at the unintended consequences of euthanasia law, it's just too great of a barrier. You know, you pass a bad law on housing, say, and suddenly people in their 20s and 30s can't buy housing.
Right.
You can try to rectify that, right? You can try to build more. You can try to build more houses. You can try to give leg ups to people. You can encourage people to move to the regions and develop the regions. You can do lots of other things to correct for your bad policy that you had for the past 10 years, 20 years. Depends on who you ask. With a euthanasia law, though, you get that wrong. Yeah. You've got one person, 5 people, 10 people, maybe even 50 people a year dying who didn't intend to, who didn't want to, who the circumstances surrounding their death were murky. I mean, when we hear about road toll deaths over the holidays, 15 people died on the roads, we feel like, oh my goodness, you know, what's going on? Why can't we have safer roads? Why can't we have more laws, more tickets? What's it going to do? Safer cars, something. how would we feel if we read there were 10 unintended deaths last year from a euthanasia law? You can't fix that. You can't correct that.
And of course another big overarching thing is you could say, if euthanasia and assisted suicide was introduced into our country, it's like, oh well, we completely eliminated youth suicide. How did you do it? Oh well, we introduced euthanasia.
I don't know, it just happened after this bill passed. But
of course that massive problem that this bill really undermines suicide prevention efforts.
It does. The evidence is really patchy on the effects of euthanasia legislation or assisted suicide legislation on suicide rates, because it's so hard to do causality. It's almost impossible to trace it back. There was one study done a couple of years ago in the U.S. looking at Oregon and Washington, and it found that there was no drop in suicide. Like some proponents will say, we'll have fewer suicides if you pass assisted suicide legislation because terminally ill people who would have otherwise killed themselves in their own ways and alone can now either be comforted by an assisted suicide law or have an assisted suicide death. And they found that this was not the case. There were not fewer suicides, and actually the suicide rates increased more rapidly in the states where or assisted suicide had been passed than in other states. And of course, causality again you can't prove, but they said this is something that we should be watching. This is interesting. And you hear from mental health experts all around the world, and including in New Zealand, who say, this is going to make my job harder. How do I tell my 17-year-old patient who's like, my life is hard, I'm suffering, I can't see any way out, there's nothing left that makes me happy, that gives me fulfillment, that makes my life worth living. Why can't I end it? Why is it wrong for me to end it, but not wrong for this person who has this chronic condition to end it? Why is it not wrong for this person who has a terminal condition to end it? I have a terminal condition, it's depression, isn't it? Why?
What is suffering, right?
So I feel like you've kind of answered this question already. It's very objective. There's a very objective level to reason for not wanting.
He's got an answer.
Yeah. There's a very objective reason for not wanting euthanasia, but often you hear people say, it's just Catholics or it's just religious people that are against euthanasia, so I don't need to listen to your argument. Right. So would you say it's a religious people thing to not want euthanasia, or?
No, definitely not. And I would actually say, so I read a lot of the submissions that came through to the Health Select Committee. So they had 21,000 plus submissions through. And in reading those, you realize how divided even religious communities are. You read one from a Catholic or a Methodist or a Baptist saying, my reading of the Bible, my understanding of my faith, my understanding of the world out of my faith is that God has control over a person's life and they shouldn't end it prematurely. But then you'd get the next one up would say, as a Methodist preacher, I believe that people should have a compassionate end to their lives and God did not make us to suffer. Therefore, I fully support changing the law to allow for euthanasia. Religious communities are actually quite divided on this. There's no one religious response to it because people differ and they take their faith to tell them different things on all sides of the debate. You will often see religious people potentially more on opposing it, and coming out of a different understanding of human life and what it's worth, maybe putting a little bit more value on an intrinsic value to humanity rather than a qualitative one, rather than saying it's about being able to do certain things or feeling certain things or being a certain way. It's actually just something about the person. But humanists also will share that. Sure. So you'll get humanists who, out of their belief, will say, actually I can't support this because of my fundamental beliefs about what a human being is and why they're valuable. For me and for many others, I know when I talk to parliamentarians especially, they're not necessarily looking at it coming out of those fundamental beliefs. They're looking at it as a matter of law.
Right.
And looking at what's best for the public, because they realize New Zealanders have so many different philosophies and religious backgrounds and cultural understandings that they're coming from, and you can't really legislate based on just one.
Right, I see.
So you have to look at it as knowing we have a diverse population that believes diverse things, but still holds to a vague sense of some common good. What's the best law that we can pass? And you look at what's the best for the public, what's the best based on our understanding as the law tells us about humans and what the law is there for, and the person in our society, and you make the law that way. And I think when you look at it in those terms, if you're uncomfortable with unintended deaths, if you're uncomfortable with people feeling pressure to end their lives, then you see that there's slightly more compelling evidence towards opposing this legislation
Yes.
and supporting it.
So for anyone who's watching this who may not have made up their mind, you might not have made up your mind about the debate. So yeah, I guess we just encourage you to take Dr. Jane's advice, do a bit more research into what's making you uncomfortable on the topic, and don't leave it just as well to your faith to figure it out. I think we're meant to use our brains on this one.
Yeah.
And or an emotional argument either, right? Like it's really, when passing legislation, it really has to be well reasoned, and you might be going through a similar thing where you have a loved one or a grandparent or someone who's going through this at this time. So, I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like, but it's a huge issue. But yeah.
And it's not just a religious one. It's a people issue. It's about people. It's for people, and it's for the betterment of people. So we need to keep that in mind, and help ourselves cool down a bit and say, actually, what is the best solution? And I mean, from what I can see, it seems like euthanasia just seems like a bad idea. But yeah.
Let us know your thoughts. Leave a comment. Please share the podcast if you can. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for bringing the tea.
Man, it was good, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
If you're
Geisha's Getaway.
Geisha Getaway from T2. Get on down and get yourself some. Also, speaking of T2, we have a little gift for you, for coming on the podcast. Just some tea in there for you.
Thank you.
And we really hope that it'll continue to go well, and that people like yourself can really make a difference in this issue. We hope we can maybe make a small little dent in it.
Yeah. Well, it's important that people think about it and talk about it, because that's really the best way we get to the best policy for New Zealand is to have people talking about it fairly and evenly and listening to all sides.
Absolutely. Cool. Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube,
and Facebook.
All of the above. Please join us.
God bless.
God bless.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Make sure that you check us out on our YouTube channel, Auckland Catholic Tertiary Chaplaincy.
You can also find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/The Chaplains.
And our Instagram account, which is Auckland Catholic Chaplaincy.
We're also now on iTunes. Just search up Gregorian Chat.
Boom.
That's right.
Thanks for listening.
God bless.